Hello everyone, this is me, Adnan Ghori, the founder and director of iWorkstation. I welcome you all for the online BIM series week 4 by Petro Karanxha. Petro Karanxha is a BIM researcher and professor in the George Brown College, Canada. He has an advanced diploma in architecture, bachelor's degree in construction management, and MSc in the international construction management. He has an excellent knowledge of construction process, construction management, building information modeling, AutoCAD, Revit, NavisWorks, and LiDar scanning products. And even he provides consulting services for the construction management, cost control, and estimating utilizing BIM process. So I invite Petro Karanxha. Yes, Petro.
Hello everyone, and welcome to this Saturday morning in Canada and I guess evening in India.
Right.
Thank you for having me, Adnan. Always a pleasure working with you. I will start the session, and today I want to talk about BIM execution planning. So how we will start this is most probably we'll go through the presentation. I have around 20 minutes, I think, or half an hour, and then I will suggest you hold your questions for the end so we can answer any question that might rise during the presentation. One of the significant aspects of BIM is outlining the participation of stakeholders in the project with respect to the BIM process and the timing of this participation. So what do I mean by that? By that I mean that you have to identify, if you're doing a BIM project, who would be the people who to be successful. You have to identify when these people going to be the project and what is required from them. So to go a little bit further, these are some of the graphics that come from the PAS 1192, which basically is the basis of the ISO 19650, which is basically the BIM documentation. So this document was much more simplified before, but now that is a standard, of course, it's a little bit more comprehensive and has less graphics. But I went and got the graphics from the PAS 1192 to show the process of how the information will go from one stage to the other. And why is this important? Because this will be the basis of your BIM execution planning. So these are the phases, and you have to identify what information you have to create during this phase structure. So this is what is considered work in progress. So these are tasks done by people. So we're not in the process yet. We're mostly in a personal, like in a lonely BIM approach shared with engineer. So all of these are part of your BIM execution planning. Are you ready to share this model? Okay. And also, are you going to use it for coordination? Is it for information? Is it for construction sign-off? Okay, or like, what are you trying to achieve? The moment you that work in progress has reached these levels of information and data, then you are ready to share this information. So the moment you are in the shared environment, what you have to understand is that now you are preparing the information to be ready to get authorized. So if you use the model as the basis of your contract, when are you ready to be shared with everyone in the team? And how will this model be shared with everyone in the team? So these are steps needed for a BIM execution plan. So after you finish the sharing and So you can follow the arrows in here. So approved. So after the work in progress is approved, this will be on the firm level. Okay. Then you go into environment where all the stakeholders are involved, and then authorized documents go to what we call published documents, okay, which are costing, your contract design, manufacture, construction, and as-built. So all these different documents need to go to published documents, which will serve as the basis of information, okay, the basis of information for the asset. Okay, so remember that this data is produced when you have when you build the model and the asset, but it will be used for the life cycle of this building. It's not going to be used only for the 1, 2, or 3 years that you're building the project. So it's very important to identify what information is embedded on the model and how this information goes from work in progress to shared to a published document. And when you reach the phase that is published documentation, and you have identified all the steps, and you have identified the project team, and all the information has reached maturity, you still can do revisions, okay? And when all the revisions are complete and verified, then it comes the next step, which will be the, and this actually is the last step, which will be the archive. So in archiving the information is very important because you will need to use this information later during the life cycle of the building. So we can take as an example, let's take an example of what will go through this process. So let's say we have to model a door, which is actually a very simple thing, modeling a door. Now, when you start the process of modeling a door, that door is not complete till the moment that you have the information required for the different phases. You're going to share that model with the different disciplines when you have identified. So the construction team might require, okay, what type of door it is, what type of detailing I need to install this door. So this is all part of that shipment. Now, the moment all this information is cleared, then you have the type of door you need, the type of the location of the door, length, width, and all the different elements of the door, then this becomes what we call authorized documentation. And the moment that the door is installed and we have as-built documents and it's verified that that is the door that you need, then this will go into archive. And the moment all this information and this data is part of this portfolio repository, then we can use this for asset management. So we can go and check, okay, who was the installer, who was the manufacturer, if we want to change the hinges, we want to change the lock, all of this information will be part of this archive that is built. Now, all of these steps that I'm talking about are part of your BIM execution plan. You have to identify in your BIM execution plan what will be work in progress, what will be considered shared, when it's authorized and how. Like, we have to identify this. And also what will be published documentation, when it is published documentation, how it is verified, and also when you archive it. And what is the information that you want to archive? I can tell you that, okay, if you do a point cloud using laser scanning, you will have terabytes of data. So how do you store this? Like, is that all relevant information? So keep in mind that this will be the process that the information will go through, and this will be the basis of a BIM execution plan. So what is going to be considered work in progress, what is going to be considered as shared information, published documentation, and archive. These are the steps that the actual BIM execution plan will go as well. So what are the focus items? Okay, so you have to identify what is the high value returns of BIM. What do I mean by high value returns of BIM? So if you are doing excavation and you want to understand what is the value of BIM on excavation, probably you don't need as many visualizations. Okay, so probably you will need to use some of the tools for understanding how you're going to move different materials on site. So probably you will most focus on site logistics instead of visualizations. Or so these are things that you have to identify. Also, you have to identify who is your BIM process leader. So in every firm, that will be somebody that is the process leader that will lead this BIM execution plan. And from the owner's perspective, he will have to have a BIM execution leader that will lead the whole project. So all these are part of this work in progress, shared, published, and archived. So work in progress, you would have many disciplines, but you still need to have a leader that will be your coordinator between the different disciplines and between the different. So the client shared area, that will be where the client will have an actual person to be in charge of the execution plan. So he will be kind of filtering the approval process between the work in progress and shared information. And the same thing will happen from the shared information to the documentation, and then from the published documentation to the archive. So these are the steps. Also, some things that are not related directly to the BIM execution plan, but have to be kept in mind when we do this, is ensure upper management is fully on board. So the upper management of your firm have to understand how the BIM will be incorporated in the project, because a lot of the in many times we're seeing that if you don't have a management backup, your organization start to question, oh, let's do it like we always did it, because that is a process we understand. This is a new process. So if the BIM execution plan is not clearly defined and understood by everyone, then you're going to run into troubles. And also consider your firm's attitude to engage in alternate forms of project delivery. Now, why is this important? BIM is a collaborative process. If you don't have a collaborative process, you are stuck in work in progress. Okay, so if you see the diagram here with the different disciplines, if you are not confident in sharing your models and your data, you are stuck in work in progress all the time. So if you don't have that integrated project delivery or collaborative approach, if you cannot do a IPD contract, but you can have a collaborative approach, then you can have a successful BIM execution planning. Because the whole idea of BIM is how do we exchange information to reduce risk in our projects. That's the whole idea. And also BIM legal implications. This program that before drawings, before you had PDF drawings submitted to the client and say, okay, this is what you have to build. Now you're submitting a model, how will that impact your legal obligations? So this is how the information in a BIM execution planning will look. So I have tried to kind of condense it as much as I can within this to serve the purposes of this presentation. So we have collaborating parties. So this is for all the parties involved have to define how the model is developed and how the information is developed and how it will be used. So if you are doing an excellent visualizations of a Revit model, but you have no purpose, you don't know why are you using it, then I think that it's a waste of time. So what type of information you're producing and how it will be used, I think is key in a BIM execution plan. So the BIM execution plan is a strategic and tactical tool to plan the social interactions of the BIM team. So if there is something I want you to leave with this presentation is to understand that the BIM execution plan is a strategic and tactical tool to plan the social interactions of the BIM team. And this will start from the engagement through the design and construction. So if you see this graph, we have the different phases of data development. So you have a program development, which basically is you want to have a project. Then you have a concept design. You start to understand, okay, what is the famous concept in a napkin that every great architect has will be the concept design. And then you have the schematic design. So you will also see here the level of development that the model needs to be. Also design development. Okay, so in design development is when you start to producing the level of development 300, which can be used for the 4D, 5D, and 6D. And then we have construction documentation with where you're going to start to produce what we call the shop drawing. So the model will serve the purposes of shop drawing. And then you have the construction and build phase, where by the end of this phase you have to build your as-built package, which will actually go to the owner for the life cycle of the project. So if you see below on the table, you're going to see that we have the data development and BIM uses by the different phases. So for example, visualizations in a BIM project will be used mostly from, I would say, program development to the design development. After that, the visualizations have kind of served their purpose. So you will most probably focus on probably analysis or quantities or documentation. If you go to fabrication of the models below, you're going to see that that starts somewhere in the middle of design development, and it should be completed by the time that you start construction. And we have COBI, which is the way you the way you define the transfer of data from the different stages for facilities management purposes, which basically starts from schematic design, because all of the room spaces that are created from the schematic design, it's an information that can be embedded in COBI and can pass through to facilities management. And then we have facility operation, which you can use some of the visualizations for that phase, and then you will probably focus mostly on data after commissioning. So that's why if you go above this table, you see the LOD 500, it's actually happening after the commissioning. But a lot of this information that is produced for LOD 500, it's produced, if you see COBI, from the schematic design, design development, construction documentation. And this is all the steps that you have to identify on your BIM execution plan. So what type of information and data you're creating, and what phase, and what is the purpose of that. So there is a fact that there is no fully developed off-the-shelf solution for BIM execution plan. So understanding the steps that we talked about above is very important, because most probably you are going to be the one that's going to create that BIM execution plan. So for you to be able to create that BIM execution plan, you have to go through these steps and understand what data are you producing and to which phase, and how that data is going to be used during the different phases. Okay, and also remember the workflow. So work in progress, shared, published documentation, and archive. So this is what a BIM execution plan in a high level will look like. Like, these are the steps you have to identify and produce a successful BIM execution plan. So your BIM model has to serve everybody in the AEC industry, so all the stakeholders, including contractors, quantity surveyors, manufacturer, information provider, engineers, government agencies, architects, users, developers, facility managers. So everybody that is involved in creating and maintaining a building will be part of this BIM execution plan and this BIM process. So the BIM execution plan identifies the stakeholders, what is their responsibilities, and how data is transferred from one stakeholder to the other, or from one phase to the other. And having said that, I think we can go to questions and answer, Adnan?
Yes, we can start, Petro.
So, can we start with the questions?
Yes, sure. So, and any one of you here in from the participants have any questions from Petro? You can raise your hand. I will unmute your audio. Yes, Kunal Chaudhary. Yes, Kunal.
Sir, I have one question.
Yes.
What will be its advantage over our conventional executing plan?
What will be the advantage? Well, I don't think there is any advantage in terms of the BIM execution plan will be better than an existing execution plan that you have. But any existing execution plans are created with the current process in mind. So they don't take into account how the data and information flows from one process to the other. So in an existing execution plan, if we were to say, okay, so how does the architect produces the information? They actually do the drawings, submit the drawings, and they say this is the final process. So the architects do their own execution plan for the drawings, but it's not part of the overall plan, because you only get what will be your content documents. But in BIM execution plan, there has to be a collaboration, because it's an ongoing process. So the way the BIM execution plan works with the traditional process is different. So that's why we have to identify what the process would be. So I wouldn't say it's better, it's just different.
Okay, sir. And sir, one term you mentioned in your presentation, that BIM legal implications.
Yes.
So
what does that mean is right now the contracts are actually defined, especially, for example, in Canada we have what we call the CCDC document, which is a standard contracts that can be used during construction. There are standard contracts that can be used for architecture. Now, the moment that you start to use BIM, the output is different. So, for example, in as we mentioned, the architect produces the PDF drawings, and that is what they are contractually liable. So everybody has defined that that is the information that you receive. Now, when you get like one level in Revit, you get the full Revit model. So it's very important in the BIM execution plan identifying what data can you extract from this BIM model to the project. So this has to do with the legal implications. So when you leave your when you produce your model, you have to specify on your BIM execution plan what that model will do. Like, what can I trust that model for? Like, remember the example I said with the door? So you put a Revit and it's not a specified door, but it's just like what will door, but it doesn't have any information of what type of door, what type of hinges. So if it's a, probably that's not very important, but if it's a hospital, the door requirements will be different. Or if it's so all of these are things that have to be identified and specified, like what will the model be used for, produced, and who is responsible.
Okay, sir.
Yeah, Petro, there was one question from one of our students, like which software should a civil engineer use to take best advantage of BIM?
Again, this is one of those questions that there is a list circulating in the internet. I'm sure you can find it if you go and check what BIM software there are. And the list includes more than 165 different software. And under the structural engineering, probably has like 10 or 15 different software. So there is Revit structure, there is Tekla, there is other software that do structural analysis. So depending on your, I think I'm muted. I'm good again. So depending on your firm and depending on the processes that you follow, which are again identified by the BIM execution plan, you will have to identify which software will fit you best. So for example, in North America, we use mostly Revit and Tekla. So some specialized firms use Tekla because they are only dealing with like special structures. So for special structures, Tekla, it's better than Revit. But if you're doing standard structures, Revit could work too. So depending on what the purpose of your project is and what your firm mostly does, that will be the software that you will choose. So that, unfortunately in BIM there is not one software that will solve all your problems.
Yeah. So Petro, there was even one question in there's a lot of repetitive questions that people used to ask. There's one basic question, like we have a term called IPD, that is Integrated Project Delivery, that is what I believe is the backbone of what BIM is. So like, can you tell us like how many companies in India or not just in India, from around the world are using IPD for implementing BIM in their projects?
In Canada specifically, I know that there was, I think, around 60 or 70 projects that have used IPD contracts. So this was for last year, but this year I think there is a higher demand, especially from municipalities, like from the government bodies, and I think that number now has doubled. So from 60 or 70, I think probably it's around 120, 150 of IPD projects. So I think that the method of delivery of a project, it's very, the method, let me reformulate this so it's clear. The method of delivery of a project is will be identified or will be kind of led by the owner. So the owners, whoever is the owner that is going to pay the money at the end of the project, he is the one that's going to say, you know what, I want IPD because it delivers me a better project. So a lot of the government bodies here in Canada, at least, were not very open-minded to start the IPD project. But some of the municipalities, the moment they started testing one or two of those, they now have starting to only request IPD.
Okay.
And the reason for that is that it kind of eliminates the risk. Like government jobs in general all over the world are identified as the ones that always go cost more. Okay, so everybody says, oh, we're going to do a project that is going to cost X amount of dollars, and it always double that amount of dollars. So governments have identified that they are not very good at identifying risks.
Right.
Okay, so this BIM execution plan done by the professionals and bringing everybody together through the IPD, it's reducing that risk for the governments. But I think that it will be dependent on the client. So whoever is the client, they are going to be the one mandating the type of delivery projects. And of course their consultant, because they're going to be advised by their consultant in terms of what type of delivery project would be best for us.
Right. So there's one more question from a participant named Vima. Like she wants to ask, like, how PAS, BS and other standards will be helpful to execute the BIM process.
So the PAS and the British standards,
and like other standards, ISO.
So those form the basis of the ISO. So all that information that we talked about today is actually the basis of the ISO. So how it will be helpful in the BIM execution process is that now all over the world there is a standard of identifying how the process should work. So all the teams, it doesn't matter in which part of the world they are, they're going to have the same process of executing a BIM project. So everybody going to be under the same platform in terms of what information they're creating, how they're creating it, and how they execute it in terms of data transfer from one stage to the other.
Right. Yes, Neha. I think you have some question. Hello, Neha? Yes.
Yeah. I want to ask, how accurate are the estimation using BIM?
The as-built documents? Well, if we use the term digital twin that is becoming very popular, I think it's an actual representation of the model in a digital form. So there are two processes. We can talk about as-built drawings.
Petro, sorry to interrupt. My question is like, how accurate are the estimation in the BIM process?
Oh, the quantities.
Yeah.
So when it comes to estimation and quantities, how accurate they are, that will depend on your BIM execution plan. So if I go back to my PowerPoint and you see the different phases, we know that the LOD 300, which is basically when you have an accurate information of what type of wall you have, where that wall location it is, and how high that wall is and what material there is. If you have an LOD 300 model, your quantities will be very accurate. Now, in your BIM execution plan, you will have to identify, do you want the whole model at LOD 300 or not? So do you want all that information embedded in the model or not? Because eventually that will translate to, do you want the, if we go back to my door example, do you want all the hinges of all the doors be modeled in Revit? So that will be that will have to be identified as I want the door LOD 300 or I want the door LOD 400. If you want all the hinges, that will be LOD 400. Why? You need also all the, how that door will connect not only to the wall, but also if there has anything embedded into that door, like hinges, key, door key, type. So all of these elements. So they can be very accurate to answer the question, but it will depend on your BIM execution planning, how you have identified what will be the most important elements that you need to include for costing purposes.
Right. There's one more question from Begum Shamima. Her question is, can interior designer join in BIM?
Yes, we had many interior designers join our program here in Canada, and also I know a lot of especially like high-end specialized interior designers are using BIM in collaboration with the architecture firms they work. Why? Because a lot of the interior design elements have to be modeled in Revit to for visualization purposes, but also for constructability issues. So how will those special elements and features of the interior will fit
Right.
in the construction space?
Right. So there's one more question from Vima. Like, is there any order to follow the standards, like in a step-by-step procedure? Is there any order to follow the standards for implementation?
Unfortunately, no. There is not. I think that was the my last slide. That there is not like off-the-shelf BIM execution plan. Why? Because it will depend on the type of projects. So let's say that you do houses. You build houses as an architect or as an engineer. The first time you're going to build that BIM execution plan, it will have to be from scratch. You have no no choice. Like you can see examples of BIM execution plans, you can use them, but it will still serve the purpose of how you work as a professional. So for example, where the emphasis will be, or what you're going to use the model, who are you partnering with in terms of the collaboration process. So there are a lot of questions that have to be answered to produce that BIM execution plan to do it properly. So it's one of those it will depend type of questions. But once you have created it once, you will know what the important steps are, which we highlighted today, and then you will make sure that the next BIM execution plan will address all of these questions again, but you're going to have a template, a starting template for your plan.
Right. So Petro, there's a tool called BIM 360 that is basically used for the collaboration in the cloud.
Yes.
By the different stakeholders and the people to collaborate on a particular project. Like, can you tell us like how the future will be, or future of collaborative BIM workflows will be?
So I was in a conversation actually a couple of days ago with some of my colleagues, right, and we were talking about BIM 360, and it's a little bit still unknown of what BIM 360 will do, because a lot of the things that they started to have as part of the BIM 360 platform, Autodesk is kind of retiring.
Okay.
And there are a lot of platforms that can be used instead of the BIM 360. So you have, for example, BIM Track. It's one of those. Also, you have Procore that is being used for collaboration and purposes. Also, there is another one. Autodesk bought them. Come. I'll remember. Most of the owners are okay. So I'm gonna read the questions. So for the BIM 360, Adnan, I think it's we have to wait and see what Autodesk is going to do, but looks like they might kind of retire that, because they had that. The quantum platform that they were introducing, they introduced it 2 years ago, but they were not ready. So I don't know how much they're going to push the quantum platform, because they want to simulate what they have done with Forge, Autodesk Forge, which basically has an open API, so everybody can collaborate under the same platform.
Right.
So it's not very clear. Like it is a good tool still for the construction process, because you can facilitate collaboration, but still has some limitations.
Okay.
So a lot of people are using other tools for.
Right. So there's one more question from Shalin Thalod. His question, most of the owners are using BIM models just for clash detection. They don't require detailed information of elements. So what are your views regarding this? Why owners are not using BIM to its full potential?
That's a very good question. I'm actually speaking on CanBIM on September 26, and I'm going to be presenting to a room full of owners here in Toronto, Ontario, regarding this question. So how can you actually transfer all this data and information from BIM models and clash detection for facility management purposes? I think it's I guess not unfortunate, but I would say a lot of owners don't fully understand the potential of BIM, even though to a certain degree they are doing BIM, because what property management and facility management requires is you working with a lot of data. So now BIM can facilitate the data transfer from the design of the project to the actual facility management process. So, but a lot of owners don't see that that value yet. But there is a big difference from I would say 2009, when probably 100% of the owner didn't know what BIM is, with what BIM is now. So it's going towards that, because that's why we're also seeing this IPD, which is part of the BIM process, and also a lot of owners are understanding that data is very important to have to maintain and facilitate their properties. So I'll just give you an example from a research in 2004 that was done in North America about data and facilities management. So in US alone, they were spending probably $1.5 billion a year just to create as-built drawings for buildings. Why? Because any as-built drawings that was produced before, they either couldn't find it or was not accurate. So they were building all this database again from the beginning. So I think as part of the BIM execution plan and that archive that we talked about, it's very important to have a clear process for an owner of how they're going to archive the information so they can use it for, because the archiving before used to be in those storage facilities. You would have like a big room with probably tens of thousands of paper drawings and documents, which now it can be stored somewhere in the cloud, and then you can just type the name of the element you're looking, or and it will bring you up all that information.
Exactly. So there's one more question coming up from the participants who have registered for this BIM series. That is, how BIM helps in maintaining the life cycle analysis of a building, the LCA.
Yes. So BIM, there are a lot of buildings, and you can see some examples from studies that are done where, for example, the Sydney Opera House, they have incorporated a full BIM process for the maintenance of that building. And I know that they are using Ecodomus as a platform to do that process. So all the information is now part of this cloud solution that will address the issues and will track the issues that this building will have over the life cycle. So with BIM, you can now start to track the data better. So let's say that you have an issue with a light bulb in a facility, and that light bulb is burning. So you change it, and then after a month it burns again, and you change it, and then after a month it burns again, and you change it. Now, before, you couldn't really track these things, but now this modeling of the life cycle will address this as an issue and say, hey, you've been changing this 3 times the last 3 months. So how can now you have to start and do what we call preventive maintenance, instead of waiting and waiting and waiting till, because this problem eventually will not fix itself. Now you can start to analyze, okay, why is this happening? Okay, so these are the things that you have to understand in the life cycle performance of the building. So you have to now start using the data that you have produced from Revit to this, and maybe you can see that, okay, who was the manufacturer or producer of this particular light fixture? Do they have a recall, or how was this fixture installed? Who installed it? Like, there are a lot of those case studies when BIM information is being used in for the life cycle assessment of the building and performance. And at the end, when the building has reached the end of life, now you can start exploring, okay, all these elements that I have on the building, can I reuse them? And talk about sustainability. How can they be reused? How can I minimize the environment costs of this building? Also, another project that we did a few years back was that we analyzed what concrete was embedded into BIM, into a structural model. And by doing that, we identified that, okay, if you change some of the mixes of concrete, you can minimize the carbon footprint of this design. So this is now possible because of BIM and all the different tools that are being used in the BIM in the BIM environment.
Right. So there are so many questions coming up as of now, but we will take one more question. Like, please tell us some information about 5D BIM.
Okay, so 5D BIM probably I would say is in the first steps of being of starting to be used. I am probably one of the first people to have used 5D BIM probably in 2012. I started to modeling with the idea of producing quantities and attaching pricing. So the whole idea was to, and I think I went to a great detail of doing this 5D modeling, where I modeled all the rebar, so on a Revit model, which basically I ended up having like to print 50 pages of rebar that was included in the building for the estimate purposes. But having said that, I think it's this can be a great use of BIM. So BIM and 5D, it can produce a lot of information for costing purposes much more earlier. So for example, in Canada, we have different estimate levels. So we have estimate A, B, C, and D. So estimate D will be an estimate that you will produce when you have full construction documentation, and that will be considered around 95% accurate. Now with BIM, you can reach this percentage of accuracy much earlier in the process. So you can actually produce much more accurate quantities much more earlier in the process than the actual process that is being used right now. Because first you have to produce the drawings and then produce the quantities. But right now what's happening is we can produce a lot of more quantities much more earlier. So for example, if you have built all your walls at level of development 300, you can have all the quantities of concrete for your foundation at the time you have identified that that process is completed. So if we go back to the to our presentation and we see work in progress, so the moment that I finished level the foundation level and I have built all the concrete and I have modeled all the rebar, now you don't need to wait for any drawings to be approved, because once this goes to the shared environment and you start saying, okay, I don't need to update this information anymore, but I'm working on the upper levels, now you can use that information as accurate 3D model for your 5D estimates. So a lot of the quantities can be identified much more earlier in the BIM process.
Right. So it was a very nice interaction with you today, Petro, and we can see like a lot of questions were there. And is there anything like you want to suggest to the participants and the people to like how they can advance further in the BIM and like what they should do as of now in terms of learning and education go forward?
What I will suggest is, since we're talking about data, I would suggest that you learn a software or a tool in your respective disciplines that will be able to analyze data or input data. And I think you'll be in, you will have a very successful career if you do that. So, for example, I'm hearing a lot lately that a lot of people are using Dynamo. I saw that you, Adnan, included one of in one of your series, Dynamo speaker. I'm a little bit sad I missed it. I wanted to actually get that session myself, but this is something that I would say to people to do, like focus on tools that can either produce or extract data from the BIM model.
Right. Exactly. We have those sessions on our YouTube channel as well. And if people here, yeah, we have those sessions. All the sessions.
Make sure I'll go check it.
You should. So any one of you, like if they miss up any sessions, they can directly go to the channel page and they can see the recorded session. So it was very nice to have you with us today, Petro. Thank you. Thank you all of you. We'll connect back again tomorrow at 8 p.m.
Thank you, Adnan. Have a good one. Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.